Apple is fresh off their latest product announcement where they unveiled the iPhone 14 lineups. Apple fanboys all simultaneously rejoiced while the haters are quick to point out, wait, isn't this the same thing that we got last year? And in some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. So before you rush out to pre-order your shiny new pocket computer, let's take a look at some of the strategies that you might want to take before making your purchase. On the whole, this event kind of reminds me of a GoPro commercial. They're always super epic and amazing and cause everyone to go out and buy a new GoPro, thinking that that's going to make their life more adventurous, only to realize that they don't actually bungee jump and they have no idea how to edit videos, and the bulk of the features are things that they'll never actually really need in the real world. That's kind of what we're looking at with a few of these new iPhone features. Satellite emergency calling for when you're off the grid, crash detection in the rare instance that you get into an accident, and super smooth image stabilization for the next time you're recording that parkour video, which conveniently looks a lot like the stabilization that you get from a GoPro. Not to mention the new ultra rugged Apple Watch Ultra for those multi-day backpacking trips, which heck yeah, I just ordered, but that's the topic for another video. However, unlike the latest GoPro, your iPhone is going to be something that is within 6 feet of you at all times rather than at the bottom of some junk drawer, so the decision of what phone to actually purchase does actually matter. So let's first take a look at the new iPhone 14. And before we get started, I'm curious, are you watching this from an iPhone right now? And if so, which one? Let me know in the comments. Now, with respect to the iPhone 14, to be honest, not much is new. You've still got the same A15 chip as the iPhone 13, the same notch, the same phone design, the same screen. And if you were to compare these side by side with the iPhone 13, you'd quickly realize that the only real difference that you get is one more GPU core in the chip, 1 extra hour battery life, and an advanced dual camera system instead of the dual camera system. This means that the only real new features are that crash detection, the SOS satellite calling, and then a slight upgrade to the camera. Personally, I don't think most folks should go out buying this unless you're getting some nice carrier promotion and don't have to pay full price. Now let's shift to the iPhone 14 Plus. Now this might be a little bit more interesting for some. This is now the cheaper option to get the larger screen. Previously, you used to have to purchase the Pro Max edition in order to get that larger screen, but no longer. If screen size is an important factor in deciding for you, then perhaps this does become an interesting option. You'll get the same cameras and everything else that's the same as the iPhone 14, but you'll also get a 6.7-inch display and a few extra hours of battery life. Now, a quick word of caution, however, I have been using the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which is the same size as the 14 Plus, and I originally really liked the size when we were staying at home all the time, but now that I've returned to the world and somewhat a world of normalcy, and I have to put this in pockets outside, I'm having second thoughts about the size, and I am considering downgrading to a smaller size iPhone. So it's very clear that they have widened the gap between the base model and the Pro models, which is kind of unsurprising given that there wasn't a hugely discernible difference between the Pro and the regular models for the 12 and the 13. So clearly they're trying to push us towards the Pro, and I think that is probably working. So now let's shift over to the iPhone 14 Pro and the 14 Pro Max. These are the same sizes as the regular 14, so that's 6.1 and 6.7 inch display, but we now also have a super bright OLED display with 2000 nits of peak brightness. That is very bright. There's also an expanded ProMotion display with a refresh rate between 1 and 120 hertz. The lower end of that is what allows us to have the always-on display as well. And now it's interesting that Apple has finally adopted something that's been on Android for years and years. I know that a lot of people are probably really excited about this, but I personally foresee myself turning it off to avoid activating that distractible chipmunk brain of mine as much as possible. In each of these Pro and Pro Max iPhones, we also have the new A16 chip. There's a lot of talk during the event about this chip and how it's leaps and bounds ahead of its competitors, but it was pretty obscure and it wasn't really clear who they were benchmarking it against. They did also benchmark it against the A13 chip, which seems strange given that that was the chip that was present in the iPhone 11, but that's, I guess, kind of beside the point. We'll have to see how it performs. Let's also talk about potentially the biggest design change, the pill, which, like the chip, is only available in the iPhone 14 Pro and the Pro Max.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
The pill, or as Apple has affectionately dubbed it, the dynamic island.
Why don't you go back to your home on island?
I mean, this is ridiculous. Apple's own website calls it the dynamic island, a truly Apple innovation that's hardware and software and something in between. And they're right. This is a truly Apple innovation. It's a textbook case of Apple taking a negative and marketing it into a feature. Most people thought it was stupid until Apple made it cool. And honestly, I'm pretty hyped about it. aside from the name. So I'll probably still call it the pill. The pill is 30% smaller than the notch when it's not flying around all over the place. And I am curious how this will look in dark mode, because every demo shows light images for that nice contrast between the black screen. But for many, I think this alone would be enough to get people excited to make the jump to the Pro lineup. The next major difference between the regular and the Pro lineups is the camera system. For me as a photographer and a creator, this is probably the biggest purchasing decision factor that I will take into account, and I really like what they've done with this camera system. The main camera has a 65% larger sensor, which makes this actually a quite large sensor, and we also have an adaptable quad pixel sensor, which is a good mix of pro function with ease of use for average users. When you're in Pro RAW, this gives you a higher resolution 48 megapixel image. However, larger megapixel sensors typically perform worse in low light. So in low light scenarios, you can instead use those quad pixels to capture 4 times the light and output a 12 megapixel instead. This is honestly pretty brilliant, and I wish that more professional cameras were able to do this. What this means for the average user is you'll get both sharp photos with the 45 megapixel option that allows you to crop in, and low light photos without too much hassle. This quad pixel sensor also adds a 4th focal length option. Now you'll notice that there's not actually 4 cameras on the back. That's because what it does is instead crops into just the middle of the sensor. So it's sort of like a digital crop, but they're calling it optical-like resolution. It is a technicality, but that is a selling point for a lot of high-resolution professional cameras, so I think we'll let Apple slide on this one. We're also getting a new sensor on the ultra-wide. Now they claim this improves macro photography, which personally I've never really had that as a main concern of the ultra-wides. I have personally always been much more concerned with how grainy the ultra-wide gets in even decently lit conditions. So the marketing claims that we're getting 3x improved low light on the ultra-wide, but that 3x of a poop emoji is still a slightly less grainy poop emoji. So we'll need to take a look at some of those more hands-on reviews before we feel really confident in the performance here. They're complaining that this is all really helped with computational photography, but again, most of my personal qualms have been with the video rather than the photo. So we really do have to see how this shakes out, but any improvement is going to be a welcomed one. And this conveniently brings us to video. Now we're getting 4K resolution on the cinematic mode, which is an upgrade from the 1080 resolution on the iPhone 13 Pro line. And we're also finally getting 24 frames per second in that cinematic mode. And of course, rounding out the GoPro analogy from earlier, we also have added the action mode for improved video stabilization. Given how the world is shifting so heavily to video and much of our content is filmed handheld on an iPhone, I think this has a potential in loads of scenarios. Shaky footage is the worst, and even the previous iPhone models did a pretty good job of stabilizing when in the ultra-wide mode. So if we can bring the stabilization of the ultra-wide with the better camera quality of the main camera, I think this has the opportunity to make a lot of purchasers happy. So with all that said, which would you add to the cart? From a post standpoint, we actually do have a lot of good improvements that I do think warrant the higher price over the 14 and the 14 Plus. That said, if you're rocking an iPhone 13 or even an iPhone 12, I think you'd be right to think that these upgrades are fairly nominal. But the whole point of these yearly refresh cycles for Apple is to continue to iterate and provide the best possible iPhone quality whenever you're ready to upgrade, not for you to upgrade every single year. I personally would recommend taking the plunge on the iPhone 14 Pro, and I'm even considering selling my iPhone 13 Pro Max to downgrade to the smaller screen. But what do you think? Do you think these upgrades are worth it? Will you be upgrading your iPhone? If so, which are you upgrading from? And if you like this video, be sure to play thumb war with that subscribe button. YouTube thinks you're going to like watching that video next, so why don't you give it a watch and see if they're right. Peace.